Ryan there on WNYC. Well, as so often happens these days, if you decide to take a news holiday to enjoy a summer weekend, you wind up getting surprised on Monday morning that all the stuff that has happened on Saturday and Sunday when you thought everybody was off. You probably know by now that Lindsey Graham died suddenly, apparently from a cardiovascular emergency. Maybe you know that the Iran war has gotten even more complicated in the last couple of days with the U.S. and Iran's different understandings. It's now clear that they understand differently the ceasefire agreement and that this disagreement, this different interpretation, is pretty significant regarding the Strait of Hormuz. Iran was attacking ships there again over the weekend, and the U.S. was bombing Iran again. The website Iran War Live, which tracks deaths and injuries on all sides, I often think we ignore the deaths and injuries too much, and center the negotiations and the politics without remembering to say how many people have died. So this website that keeps track says nearly 10,000 total deaths since the start of the war in February. It says more than 6,000 Iranians and cites U.S. and Israeli estimates for that number, 13 to 15 Americans, by different counts, more than 4,000 people in Lebanon, 57 in Israel, 119 in Iraq, and smaller numbers in some other Gulf states. And the standoff appears to be deepening, not resolving after this weekend's events. All right, also, a big bipartisan housing bill took effect Saturday night, or Friday night, I think, Saturday morning, despite Trump's refusal to sign it, holding out for his so-called SAVE Act to make it harder to vote in various ways. The Trump administration issued subpoenas, have you heard this one yet, to several New York Times journalists who reported on security deficiencies on Trump's new Air Force One presidential airplane. Graham Plattner did officially drop out of the main Senate race. Maybe you missed that. That happened late Friday, allowing Democrats to hold a convention to replace him and deepening the internal finger-pointing about who didn't vet him well enough in the first place. And by the way, while most Republicans, probably have heard this, were claiming, our party would never let such a guy get as far as Plattner got with the Democrats, guess who is kind of defending him? Here, you may have guessed it, is President Trump on his way home from the NATO summit last week.
And it's really a question of whether or not you believe the woman. A lot of people say big falsehoods.
A lot of questions about, the question is whether you believe the woman. A lot of people say big falsehoods. So with all of that as a Monday morning politics prelude, with us now is Elana Schor, senior Washington editor at Semafor. Hi, Elana. Thanks for coming back. Welcome back to WNYC. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Beginning with that Trump clip, while every Republican is piling on the Dems for choosing someone as flawed as Plattner, almost every Republican, why is Trump questioning the multiple women who accused him of various degrees of sexual misconduct?
Well, two reasons. One, think about Trump's own past and the way he's treated the multiple, far more credible cases of sexual misconduct allegations against himself, right? He's predisposed to raise questions about women's accounts regardless of who they're referencing. It's just kind of a fact about Trump. Two, I think Trump likes making chaos and creating uncertainty for the Democrats. And by sort of wading into their factional dispute over how the Plattner allegations and vetting of this candidate were handled, Trump's kind of playing his chaos agent role here.
Trump has been such a Teflon Don on that issue, from the Access Hollywood tape in 2016, where he boasted about grabbing women by their private parts, to his actual jury trial, where a jury found he sexually abused the writer E. Jean Carroll. Why do you think so much of the country has just continued to minimize that as a factor in his fitness for office?
It's unfortunate, but I think Trump and his appearance of just being anywhere between callous and abusive towards women is taken as a given by a lot of the electorate. I mean, I'm accepting probably a lot of your listeners, folks who are naturally predisposed to vote against Republicans and naturally predisposed to hear this and think, oh my God, this man is, disgusting. But I'm speaking of kind of independent swing voters just kind of assume that it's true, which can be hard to understand if you're not in their camp. But, people cast their votes based on a number of crazy factors. And a lot of people, particularly men, probably look at how Trump has approached these allegations against him and kind of see, I don't know, a fighter image. It's tough for me to project. But what I do know is that swing seat voters don't often bring this up anymore. And the truth is, it's really a Trump specific exception that's kind of an anomaly in modern politics. It doesn't happen to others.
And all these Republicans saying their party would never let a Graham Plattner get that far while they overlook Trump. Speaking of looking the other way over and over again, here are a few clips from the late Lindsey Graham. These will be a big part of his legacy. Graham while running against Trump in the 2016 Republican primaries first.
You know how you make America great again? Tell Donald Trump to go to hell.
But Graham on Trump after Trump won.
And when it comes to President Trump, Mr. President, I'm going to be your strongest ally in the United States Senate.
Here's Graham on Trump after January 6th, 2021.
We've had a hell of a journey. I hate it to end this way. Oh my God, I hate it. From my point of view, he's been a consequential president. But today, first thing you'll see. All I can say is count me out. Enough is enough.
But here's Graham on Trump not long after that.
We can't do that without Donald Trump, so he's ready to hit the trail, and I'm ready to work with him.
So, Elana, can you say if there was anything that underlied all those flip-flops other than maybe Graham's own interest in aligning with where he thought power would be based on whether Trump seemed to be up or down so Graham could stay relevant? Is that too cynical?
It's not cynical. I think that's 100% probably the primary factor here. Not to psychoanalyze Lindsey Graham, though, he had a very interesting background. He grew up, this is, according to him and his family's lore, in a single room above, his parents' bar and restaurant. And both of his parents struggled with alcoholism. When evaluating his death, it's important to recall his father died of a heart attack at 69, 2 years younger than him. And I think what that tells us about Lindsey Graham, he's incredibly good at rolling with the punches with very mercurial figures. It's kind of like who he is. And I see, having covered him for many years, him taking, honestly, the same approach to Donald Trump. Now, mind you, Donald Trump is a teetotaler, right? But the same flexibility in the face of chaos and the same predisposition to always make the person you want to cultivate feel like you're on their side. It was kind of a lifelong thing for Lindsey Graham.
And Graham was a big hawk on Iran and had the president's ear right up until his last day of life. Did he end his time on Earth unhappy with Trump for not escalating further?
I don't know if unhappy is the word. I think, to your point, he felt there was just still more shaping of Trump to be done. My colleagues at Axios, great reporters, had this morning an interview with someone who was probably the last person to speak with Graham before his death, that very night. And according to this person, told Axios, Graham said, I don't feel well, but you know what? I'm going to do meet the press first because I really got to keep pushing Trump to find the Hormuz solution so I can normalize Israeli-Saudi relations. So he decides I'm going to call my doctor later, and he doesn't survive the night. It's just a striking anecdote.
I guess you don't know anything about his history of getting medical care or not getting medical care. Reading about that kind of aortic rupture that he died from, my understanding is, and especially since it came from a buildup of plaque in his arteries, atherosclerosis, which happens over time, over many years, that a lot of people who have that underlying condition, once it's diagnosed, they get things like echocardiograms where the doctors can see every year. If the aorta is getting enlarged in such a way that could lead to this kind of rupture, and there are ways to prevent it, like a stent or other things, depending on the individual, of course. But I don't know, it just made me wonder, did he have this did he know that he was getting hardening of the arteries and just was somebody who blew off regular medical care? Any idea about that?
You're raising very relevant and important questions, Brian. To be frank, no, we don't have, and I haven't really seen anyone in the press corps crack that kind of detail about what went into his passing. But all these questions are super relevant. I mean, it's unfortunate, frankly, that there's a lot of attention out there on conspiracy theories about, because he was such a hardline defender of Zelensky and was Russia somehow involved. I think the questions you're asking are more relevant. And, broadly speaking, Lindsey Graham was 71, and he wasn't even really in the 20 oldest senators. To the American public, 71 seems pretty old, right? So this is still part of a broader conversation about gerontocracy and power and how that affects people's decision-making, their ability to know when it's time to seek care, all relevant questions.
And listeners, any questions you have or comments on the national politics news of this weekend or anything relevant ongoing for Elana Schor from Semafor, 212-433. WNYC, call or text 212-433-9692. Still on Lindsey Graham. He was very close with the late Senator John McCain, who was also a hawk on Iran, but seemed much more principled in his willingness to oppose Trump when he thought that was the right thing to do. Did they have a falling out over that, if you know, before McCain died during Trump's first term?
There was talk about a rift that maybe wasn't so abrupt as to be called a falling out. I don't really believe that was ever confirmed by anyone in the press corps. But, McCain and Graham were not always aligned on everything. They called themselves the three amigos with Joseph Lieberman, right? But these were not three men who agreed on everything. And they were oftentimes known for, their spirited differences. So I think it's fair to say there was a divergence between the two, but I'm not quite sure we know whether there was a falling out.
Yeah. Can we assume Graham's seat will remain Republican this fall, or could it get competitive? It is South Carolina, after all, so probably not. But, I heard some rumblings a couple of years ago about, even South Carolina might be in play these days. Texas might be in play. South Carolina. So is it automatic that Graham's seat will remain Republican once they find a Republican replacement? He was up for re-election this year.
Yeah, look, nothing is fully predictable in the Trump era and politics. So never say never on Annie Andrews. Annie Andrews, the Democratic nominee, faced Graham before, strong candidate here. But the truth is, Andrews was going to benefit more from Graham than any potential Graham replacement. And that is because of how much of a hawk Graham was. The isolationist, kind of like Rand Paul segment of the South Carolina GOP, the more, those folks did not like Graham, and they were maybe going to stay home, which could have boosted Andrews. Now you're potentially looking at a more establishment replacement in the MAGA line who would be harder to beat, but, we'll see who wins.
On Iran, I was already going to ask you, what choices is Trump facing now that it seems Iran still intends to control the Strait of Hormuz and attack ships there, as they have different understandings of what they actually signed in that memorandum of understanding. But now I see breaking news just while we were talking to each other. I'm going to read you a Politico version. Maybe you have it at Semafor as well. The headline is, Trump says, U.S. to take over Strait of Hormuz, charge 20% fee for cargo shipped through it. Have you seen that?
I have. This is a classic Trump thing. Keep in mind, he's also trying to take a quote unquote cut of American AI companies. He's, mounted government stakes in companies, making a lot of different things relevant to national security interests. He likes the idea of a public stake. I'm not quite sure this is going to fly. The relevant part of what he said is the reinstitution of the blockade, right? Which is not good. It effectively puts us back to a lot of the pre-memorandum of understanding dynamics here. And I think it's a fair question, as of our conversation, whether that MOU has any hope at this point. When the shooting really kind of started back up again late last week, there was some talk, we're we're going to dig back in on these talks. We think it could still work. Like two things are happening at once, but now it's kind of seeming like one thing is happening at once, which is more war. So,
Yeah, and I'm just sight reading this. So as I'm reading into it, I see Trump made that comment on Fox and Friends, the Fox News morning show. He said, we're going to hit Iran very hard and keep the strait and probably run it. All other countries will have fair and open use of the strait. But he added that as a matter of fairness, the U.S. will be reimbursed at the rate of 20% on all cargo shipped for any and all costs necessary to do the job of providing safety and security to this very volatile section of the world, quoting Trump from Fox and Friends this morning. Isn't that kind of the opposite of what they were going for, which was no tolls? They wanted to stop Iran from tolling the strait, which Iran had never done before. Now they were going to start doing it. And Trump was saying, no tolls. It should be free for every country. These are international waters. Now he's saying the U.S. will do exactly what he was going to war or staying at war to stop Iran from doing. I don't get that part.
I think that's fair to not understand. It seems contradictory on its face. I mean, I'm speaking in real time as this evolves without kind of the White House's contextualizing of this. I'm sure they would probably say, well, we're not going to be charging these alleged tolls forever. This is a short-term period while we get back to right-siding the MOU. But again, Ryan, I just don't see how that happens because the conditions keep worsening here. And it's important to kind of pull back and realize the rest of the world is starting to plan for a world in which the Strait of Hormuz almost maybe never goes back to like the free flow of shipping that we saw before. Because even during the brightest days of the ceasefire/MOU dynamic, the number of ships going through Hormuz had not come close to previous numbers. So, this is all bad.
The other immediate question that I had, and this might be, above your expertise as a general Washington editor, we may need a kind of military analyst on this. But when Trump says that the U.S. will take over the Strait of Hormuz, we did have a military analyst on the show closer to the beginning of the war who said in order to do that, there would have to be a ground invasion of Iran because that's where the points are from where they're firing on ships going through the straits. And this is the one thing Trump has tried not to do, right? Get into a ground war where presumably more Americans will die right in the middle of the midterm elections. And I don't know if those two things fit together. I know he says a lot of things that he doesn't follow through on, but if he's serious about the U.S. taking over the Strait of Hormuz, I think this is one of the questions that has to be asked. How do you do that without a ground invasion?
As a non-military analyst, but someone who has also looked into similar questions at Semafor, I think you're right. It's difficult to say the U.S. can totally control the strait without that. It can do what Trump would say is like marketably controlling the straits without ground troops, because I do not believe the administration wants to do that. It has come pretty close to that brink earlier in the war and stepped back, possibly because it knows that would really trigger like a full-on Republican revolt with members wanting to flee this war. But we'll see. Trump is, recurring theme, unpredictable and known for chaotic last-minute decision-making changes.
Jeffrey in Queens on Lindsey Graham. Jeffrey, you're on WNYC. Hello.
Much. I'll get right to the point. January 6th, according to our president, was a joyous holiday. And everybody knows that. No, we don't know that. But I think Graham turned around, and thank you for an excellent show. Graham turned around and said, this is what I've got to work with. They put, according to Jeffrey here, they put the devil in the White House. They put the devil in. I mean, look, earlier you mentioned that maybe America and Iran doesn't agree on everything. Well, we did send our foremost expert, Jared Kushner,
Jeffrey getting on the satire beat now. Yeah. But are you saying that Lindsey Graham may have just been instead of just like taking a dive to stay relevant for his own ego, that he may have been playing the room the way he found it with Trump after January 6th so that he could stay relevant for policy purposes?
Well, as Mr. Sarcasm, I get to say, Brian, who I love dearly, no, you said that. I didn't say that. I didn't even suggest anything. I didn't say anything. I just said that, we were told that our soldiers don't have to follow illegal rulings. And then the president convicted all of them to, lose their jobs because they said, don't do anything illegal, and he got rid of everybody.
I hear you. Jeffrey, thank you very much. On that other Graham, whose party has to choose a successor for him, Graham Plattner, I see Semafor, you at Semafor, have reporting on Democrats turning on consultants who promoted Plattner in the first place. What's some of that dynamic now that their guy flamed out?
A lot of it is focused on the Fight Agency. That's a company that played a big role in the 2022 election of John Fetterman, who your listeners probably know well as a progressive who hasn't really operated as a progressive since he took office, played a big role in Plattner's rise, and is playing a big role in Abdul al-Sayed's campaign in Michigan. Fight Agency is a rising progressive force. One big name I should have mentioned early, Mamdani, the mayor of New York City, a Fight Agency client. But there are some other progressive consultants who helped recruit and promote Plattner, and all of them are under some pretty harsh scrutiny now because there's kind of evidence that all of them kind of turned a blind eye to the obvious red flags in Plattner's background. Didn't really do what we in Washington call a full vet. And I think there was a confidence problem where a lot of these folks felt, well, people want human candidates who can understand what it's like to go through adversity. Graham Plattner served our country. He was struggling with PTSD. All this stuff made him more compelling and relatable. We all make mistakes, but you know what? Like the red flags were bright red. So that is the sum of what's happening.
Yeah. And I guess part of the challenge for the Democrats now is after how many people voted in the primary? Something over 100,000, right? In the main Democratic primary.
I believe, close to 150. Yeah.
Yeah. Now they're going to have a state Democratic convention with about 600 people, I've read, which is a fairly big state Democratic convention, but it obviously isn't 150,000 people who got a chance to have their say in the first place. Do you have a sense yet? I realize you're a Washington editor. You're not an Augusta, Maine editor. But do you have a sense yet of how they might go about it with an eye toward filling that seat with somebody who can generate something like the same enthusiasm if they have any hope of beating Susan Collins?
Yeah, well, I mean, I will give Maine Democrats credit. They've been pretty transparent throughout this about wanting to try to do it right. And what they see as right is delegates who will represent various counties in the state, who will come to the convention. I believe it's in a couple weeks, and vote. And, they have a lot of choices, but part of the issue here is that when you don't fully vet the first standard bearer, all the potential second standard bearers maybe get over vetted. There's a lot of excess scrutiny to make sure there's not even a pink flag. I'm abusing the metaphor here, but the point is that all of these folks trying to replace Plattner are going to have trouble replicating his momentum, not because of the convention, but because of this national media spotlight, because people like me suddenly know so much about what's going on in Bangor and are taking out our huge magnifying glasses. That can lead to, overcautiousness in terms of these delegates choosing somebody maybe with the cleanest record, but maybe not the most compelling presence on the campaign trail.
Let me touch two other things before you go. Another national politics story from over the weekend that people may have missed if they were going to the beach or whatever normal people who are not you and me do on the weekends. Trump's Justice Department subpoenaed some New York Times journalists. Why?
This is, I think, one of the most undercovered stories in the nation right now, because based on what we know, and a lot of this is from the Times talking about itself, there was a report about the new Air Force One gifted to the president from Qatar's government. and the fact that it currently lacks some of the advanced security features that the previous aging Air Force One had. And as a result, Trump was not able to fly out of the NATO summit in Ankara on his shiny new plane, had to transfer to that new plane halfway through because, the Secret Service is scrubbing the plane and maybe raising some questions, right? So this is an important, interesting story. But what happened, according to the Times behind the scenes, is the subpoenas were issued after the president kind of became infuriated about these leaks and people talking about his plane. And one thing we at Semafor were able to confirm is Kash Patel, director of the FBI, was summoned to help with, a leak hunt imminently. And that shows Trump is taking this report very, very personally almost, and lashing out in the form of these subpoenas, trying to find out the sources of the reporters. Now, the Times is going to fight them, but also consider that this is coming less than 2 weeks before a rescheduled White House Correspondents' Dinner where Trump is supposed to speak and maybe make jokes in front of the press. It's all tense and awkward and raises real questions.
Yeah, I mean, anything like that is obviously intended to intimidate the press from reporting controversial things, certainly controversial things that might make Trump look bad. But why subpoena journalists over this out of all the reporting that goes on in Washington? Is it to change the subject from how bad Trump looks for having boasted about this fancy gift from the UAE without the basics of presidential security that the old planes had that you think would be de rigueur? Why this out of all the potentially embarrassing reporting that goes on in Washington?
Well, that to me, in addition to the press freedom component, is the most undercovered and compelling part of this, right? And, not being an expert, but employing a couple of near Trump experts, I think we fail to appreciate how fixated Trump can be on his personal environment and how paranoid isn't the word, but how intensely sensitive he is when he sees people talking about that. I mean, look at what he's done to Washington, D.C. His team keeps records in detail about the number of fountains he's attempted to beautify. And I think for him and his aides in his orbit, this new Air Force One is part of that. So they really don't like hearing that people are whispering behind the scenes about problems.
And one last thing before you go. This one is 2 weeks old, but I just saw it yesterday. So I'm going to give myself, a little bit of license to call it news from this weekend because I just saw it this weekend. Vice President J.D. Vance says Watergate shouldn't have brought down Nixon, and he blames the deep state. Listen.
If Watergate happened tomorrow, it would be like a 12-hour news story. Like the idea that it would have taken down a presidency is crazy. And by the way, if you look at the story of how the deep state took down Richard Nixon, it's not all that different from what the same groups of people, the same institutions tried to do to Donald Trump in the first Trump administration. There is a parallel.
So is the GOP now into rehabilitating the Watergate scandal of all things? And oh, by the way, I'll just throw in the presidential cover-up, which is really what brought Nixon down, not the break-in.
I mean, I think the answer maybe yes. I don't know if rehabilitating is the right word, but keep in mind, like, Donald Trump is a big admirer of Richard Nixon. He's made that pretty clear. They have a Roy Cohn element in common. So this Vance comment, although it was striking in its like almost casual revelation of what a lot of people would like find eyebrow raising, speaks to what they see the deep state as in Trump's network, which is like the establishment. For a lot of them, it's synonymous. So, for Vance, and again, respectful and reasonable people can harshly disagree. Nixon was taken down by the establishment that was somehow threatened. I mean, that is how a lot of Trump allies kind of view the world and certainly view Donald Trump. So it is one of those comments that is both shocking in some way, but also like truly telling and kind of consistent with a worldview.
And it really comes back to our lead angle in this conversation today, which is how much they think a president should be able to get away with that is actually bad behavior and let it roll off if it's their side.
Well, yeah. I mean, think of the famous quote, Brian, Trump, being able to shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue, was it? I forget the street that he used and get away with it.
Fifth
And,
Avenue.
Fifth Avenue, thank you. And later, the Supreme Court essentially validated the concept of immunity for whatever he wants to do in the context of his executive branch duties, famously. So they're pushing on this perspective in real ways and have been for years.
Elana Schor, senior Washington editor at Semafor. Thanks for joining us today to help start off the week.
Thank you.
WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.
The United States is about to mark its 250th anniversary.
And so on the Global Story podcast from the BBC, we're telling surprising tales of American influence on the world stage and in ordinary people's lives all across the globe.
We have this ability to export our story, and a lot of people bought it.
I feel like the American dream is alive but not well.
From the BBC, it's the United States at 250.
Listen wherever you get your podcasts or find us on YouTube.